Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Truth on the Tracks. I'm Brandon Turbeville, your host. Tonight is April 3rd, 2017, and tonight's show is going to be a bit odd. We're going to do something different. Well, it's something different, but we've done it before. I'm going to run an interview that was not conducted by me. It was conducted by Willem Felderhof. It was a gentleman who interviewed Vanessa Beeley about early March. I would assume this was done in early March, and I'll tell you why I'm going to do that in a minute. I think he's from Denmark. I think Willem is from Denmark. But we're going to talk about that in just a minute. Before I do, I should give the show a plug, Truth on the Tracks. You can catch it every Monday night at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time here at ucy.tv. It's rebroadcast throughout the week. It's also the archive versions put up on BrandonTurbeville.com. Activist Post repost the show. A couple of other networks and other listening sites repost the show and re-air it as well. If you're interested in my work, activistpost.com, naturalblaze.com, eraofwisdom.org, and of course, BrandonTurbeville.com is where you want to be going. That is the website where I repost all of my articles, all of the YouTube videos, and all of the relevant information is going to be found there at BrandonTurbeville.com. You can find the links to my books there as well, and that site is updated continuously, and you can catch up especially on the Syrian crisis, but I deal with other things. There's only so many hours in the day to write, and unfortunately not all of those hours are mine, and I wish they were, but unfortunately they're not. And now tonight, what we're going to do is I'm going to run an interview with Vanessa Beeley. The interview was conducted by Willem Felderhof. Now, this interview, I think Willem again is in Denmark, but I've ran a few interviews with Vanessa, and I've run an interview with Eva Bartlett because they are really the tip of the spear in terms of the reporting on Syria. Eva and Vanessa both have been on the ground, not just once or twice or three times, but they've been on the ground several times, many times, and they've also stayed in Syria for a significant period of time, not just 3 days in, 3 days out. They've spent weeks in Syria, going all over the country, speaking to victims, speaking to the Syrian people, civilians. I'm not sure if they got to speak to military personnel. I imagine they probably have. They've spoken to a number of different people in Syria. They've been steeped in Syria, the culture, the information, the situation, all of it. They're right there on the ground. Vanessa, for instance, was on the ground in Syria when it was liberated by the Syrian army. She was in East Aleppo, right? She went to a number of different places there that were not exactly safe. She exposed many of the lies that were spread by Western corporate media outlets regarding the situation in Syria and other places in the region too. I mean, Vanessa doesn't just cover Syria; she covers basically the Middle East. And this, I think, is important. I think if anybody has any interest in the Syrian crisis, and it's not just it's not just Syria, because all of this stuff ties in together. When you realize how overtly and obviously you're being lied to by the system, you see how this ties in to a number of different issues. And I think this interview tonight that I'm going to air is important. One of the reasons that I wanted to air this particular interview is because Vanessa breaks it down in terms of really who's in charge of this whole expedition, this Western expedition against Syria. She starts at the top, and I think she even uses the pyramid description, which is incredibly accurate. And of course, the Dutch interviewer asked her about the white helmets, because the Dutch government is, of course, funding the white helmets, and they go into the white helmets as well. The interview is about 42 minutes or so long, and I highly encourage you to check it out. Now, I also encourage you to go to Vanessa's website, which is thewallwillfall.org. She writes for 21st Century Wire. That website has gotten much better over the last few years. I think Patrick Henningsen is the editor there, and the website's greatly improved over the last few years. Vanessa writes for 21st Century Wire. Her website is thewallwillfall.org, THEWALLWILLFALL.org, and she basically uses that website as I use mine, so you can read all of her reports there as they're reposted. I'd also encourage you to go to YouTube and just type her name in, Vanessa Beeley interview, and check out her work. Plenty of stuff up there for free that you can read about, and I encourage you to do so, especially reading her work. Now, one of the things before I air the interview I want to bring to your attention is the possibility that Truth on the Tracks may not be here when you tune in, maybe next week, the week after, maybe the week after that, maybe both or all 3 weeks. And I want to bring that to your attention so you don't get alarmed and think that Truth on the Tracks no longer exists, or that I stopped doing the show, or that there's any drama. That's not the case. This is pre-planned. It's unfortunate that I wouldn't be able to record the show. It's unfortunate that I don't have enough time to do the show justice sometimes, and therefore you might be missing a few weeks. This is not something I want to keep a practice of being gone 2 or 3 weeks at a time, but this specific instance is something that I'm just going to be unable to overcome in terms of the logistics of the show. So again, next week, you're hearing the show tonight on April 3rd, but the week after that, and the week after that are the 3 weeks that you might not hear Truth on the Tracks. And I'm not even guaranteeing that you won't hear it, but if you tune in and you hear a rerun, or you hear something else in place of it, don't panic. Don't send emails asking me if I've quit UCY, or that if I'm done with Truth on the Tracks. I'm not. I just have to attend to some other things, and it's set up in a way that I'm not going to be able to do the recording. So stay with us, bear with us. The show's going to be back. You'll be back to getting your news briefings, and we'll be discussing solutions soon enough. So I just wanted the listeners to know that we're not going to disappear anytime soon. Now, there are a few things I could mention in the time before I air the interview with Vanessa here, and this is the possibility of a regional world war taking place in Syria. I should mention this before we get started. The Israelis have been lobbing missiles, of course, not missiles, but lobbing jet fighters. They're engaging in drone strikes in Syria. They are acting aggressively, to say the least. A report by Al Diyar, which is a Lebanese media outlet, has come out that the Syrian government has issued a very serious warning to Israel, and apparently they did that. The message was delivered via Russian officials, and it was quite clearly stated that if Israel attacks Syria again, that Syria is going to respond with deadly force, that they're going to use Scud missiles against Israeli targets. The report stated that Syria's position is that if Israel bombs Syrian military targets, Israel will have their own military targets targeted by the Scud missiles. In addition, that if Israel attacks civilian targets, that Syria might target Haifa the port of Haifa and the petrochemical plant there. Al-Diyar says that Syria has a cache of over 800 Scud missiles, and it's prepared 4 of them for launch in retaliation for any further Israeli incursion. But, of course, Israel is bolstered by the fact that the United States has traditionally been satisfied to treat the Zionist settler state as its own 51st state. They've dismissed the threats as a bluff. The fact is, Israel's always ready to fight and die to the last American. It's the main reason it's been able to provoke and murder and commit genocide for the last several decades with virtually no consequence. But if the reports can be believed, the Syrians may very well be serious this time around. So there are some people who are pointing out that Scud missiles are largely antiquated weaponry, and that they might not be able to penetrate Israel's Arrow or Iron Dome defenses. That's up for debate. But the Scuds themselves could be a cover for some type of more advanced weaponry that Israel's not expecting, and the Syrians haven't announced that they've got. Perhaps they got them from Russia. Perhaps they got them maybe from Iran. I don't know. Perhaps that they're not there, but perhaps they are. So if this does happen, if Israel launches another attack on Syria and Syria responds, then we certainly want the Trump administration to hold true to America first. No war for this little Jewish Ulster. None of it. We will let Israel fight their own battles, right? That's what we need to do. Now, just a couple of minutes. Speaking about the Trump administration, we have reports coming out now that Donald Trump and the Trump administration has given the CIA even more authority to conduct secret drone strikes. Now, Obama himself, being the drone bomber-in-chief, after pressure from human rights groups, activists, and independent media coverage of CIA drones dropping bombs on families and children at wedding parties, other social gatherings, after that caused enough of a controversy, the administration attempted to mitigate the bad public relations it was getting by allegedly taking away the authority of the CIA to control the drone program and then giving it to the U.S. military. The Nobel Prize winner, the left's favorite warmonger, he was well known for being an assassin. Every morning he would evaluate and approve the kill list before beginning his daily performance of being worshipped and fake crying after questionable acts of gun violence. Then the President of the United States was, of course, the world's best-known assassin. But the alleged removal of carte blanche from the hands of the CIA really meant nothing in reality. It only added a few seconds of bureaucracy to the process. Pentagon does tend to report many of its drone strikes, while the CIA does not, however, so that is, a relevant fact. But now the Trump administration has removed that little detail of bureaucracy and is allowing the CIA the carte blanche it used to operate with, right? We have a report by Slate saying that. We had the Slate report saying that Trump gave the CIA new authority to conduct covert drone strikes, according to the Wall Street Journal. It was apparently involved. There was apparently a drone strike allegedly bombing al-Qaeda commander Abu al-Qaeda al-Masri in Idlib. We don't know if that guy's real, if he's dead, or what. But nevertheless, the Trump administration gave him the authority. And this Slate ends by saying that the CIA does not report drone strikes. So the fact that this attack, there was a drone strike in Pakistan also earlier this month, was not acknowledged by the Pentagon as it normally would be, tends to point to the fact that this was probably done by the CIA. This is a contradiction between Trump's public display and his private decisions, right? This is even picked up by Slate. They said Trump's allies have suggested an ongoing campaign by the deep state to undermine his presidency. Still, it appears Trump does trust the CIA to kill people. That's actually a rare moment of candor from Slate. So what's Trump actually thinking? Did he have a skirmish with the deep state apparatus and it show him who the real boss is? Is he finally getting the message and backing down and giving the CIA what it wants little by little? If he's truly in a battle with the deep state, giving the CIA permission to launch drone strikes at will is perhaps the worst possible strategy to fight it. In this setup, if Trump gets out of line, all the CIA has to do is drone bomb a mosque or a school or a home for sick puppies. And, after all, the buck stops with the president. Trump will be blamed. You'll have the Mockingbird media going after him for every misstep. And the CIA can sit back and let him take the heat. So this new decision certainly sounds ill-advised for somebody who's battling the intelligence community. Even if they're not battling the intelligence community as they should be, then allowing the CIA the opportunity to conduct covert drone strikes is an absolutely terrible idea. So this is all the time we've got before I air this interview. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm Brandon Turbeville. This has been Truth on the Tracks. We hope to see you next week. If we don't, we will be back in the very near future. So don't panic. Stay with us. Keep checking back every week, Monday night, 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time at ucy.tv.
Okay, today I'm having a talk with Vanessa Beeley, which is an honor for me. And we're going to be talking a little bit about the situation of the past months, situation in the Middle East, and especially in Syria. And first I would like to start to thank you, Vanessa, for your work, for your brave work of sharing the truth with humanity about what's going on there, and that is difficult and hard. So I can thank you on behalf of a lot of people, I think, for doing it and keep doing it. It's especially for people in Holland. What I see, it's difficult to accept the idea that our governments and our media are portraying the situation in Syria and the Middle East or in general in a way which does not reflect reality, or the fact that our governments actually actively supporting proxy terrorism, and especially the situation in Syria, and your reporting on this exposed that a lot. Can you tell something about the situation it was and now, and the current developments of that?
You're absolutely right. It's very hard to comprehend that our governments would deliberately destabilize sovereign nations, which under international law, the UN Charter, Articles 1 and 2, their sovereignty and the self-determination of their people should be held sacrosanct. However, our governments have systematically violated their own laws that they created themselves, and are propelling us towards a state of lawlessness that we have been witnessing now for many decades. Syria has exposed that lawlessness probably more than any other intervention, which is why obviously there is now such a schism between various societies, those who perceive what is happening, and those who are still clinging to the security that their governments could not possibly be involved in such a heinous scheme, which is destroying a country, causing untold bloodshed, suffering and misery, not only through the fact that they are waging a proxy war against this country, involving hundreds if not thousands of factions of militant extremists that they are funding, that they are arming, that they are equipping, but also through the US-EU sanctions that are further destabilizing this nation, further ensuring that the Syrian state cannot care for its own people, further ensuring the misery and the real suffering of these people, cancer patients that can't receive treatment, children that can't receive kidney dialysis treatment or any sort of treatment. So the war against Syria, as it has been waged on every other target nation, is being waged on many different levels, as you quite rightly say, on a propaganda front, which is being led by the media that is aligned with our regimes and with their geopolitical agendas inside Syria, which is predominantly regime change, but also to protect the security of their greatest ally in that region, which of course is Israel, which is their outpost military base within the Middle East. So I comprehend entirely where it's hard for people to understand the level to which our governments are involved in the devastation, another devastation of another sovereign nation.
Yeah. Yeah, it is very difficult for people to grab that and to accept it and to act upon that and to do what to do about it. This schism you mentioned, because we clearly saw now this fake news thing came more and more than ever is a reality, became a reality. But today there were imposed new sanctions. They wanted to impose new sanctions here. So it's sort of, this is continuing, this agenda.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, there is also this so-called awakening, or you want to call it, on the information of what's really happening. So that's also happening in the establishment or in the United Nations. So it's difficult to...
I think also, I think what you need to do is to explain how the actual system works. So, because in my opinion, for many decades now, we've been undergoing a gaslighting process, which is it's like a term in psychology which involves the breaking down of our own ability to judge situations, even our own self-identity to a large extent. And then eventually, once we are in a state of complete vulnerability, which is usually governed through fear, whether that is fear of financial insecurity, fear of terrorism, fear of losing your job, fear, all of these different layers of fear have been used against us for many years now. And we're in a state now where actually we are accepting this alternative reality that is being fed to us through this matrix, this apparatus. And how I would describe that apparatus is that you have, at the top, you have the ruling elite, our governments and those who govern them, those who fund them, those who determine their foreign policy. We then come down, if you like, if we imagine it as a triangle. Those ruling elites, whether they are corporatists, whether they are the government, whether they are the various organizations behind the military-industrial complex, for example, the armaments industry, will then themselves create what they will call foundations. Those foundations will then spawn the NGOs, the non-governmental organizations. But if we keep imagining this as a triangle, so we have those ruling elites at the top creating the foundations funnel the money into the NGO complex, the soft power complex. And then basically, so this money is filtering down from the top into the NGO complex. And then, of course, public money is being put into those NGOs because the public, largely preoccupied with their own issues and so on, are only too pleased to have an organization which will relieve them of the necessity to actually take responsibility for what is happening in the world. By giving money to these various organizations that purport to give them a stake in saving humanity, that absolves them of any sort of guilt for what is happening in the world. So it's a win-win situation as regards, in their perception. So they put their money into these NGOs, but unfortunately the majority of these NGOs are then simply laundering this money back into the foundations and obviously then back up and into the elite. If we then look at what these various NGOs and in Syria,
the NGO are non-governmental organizations for a lot of people who are not familiar with these concepts.
Yeah, and this is a complete misnomer as well. They're called non-governmental organizations. Generally speaking, the foundations are created to create a distance from the governmental organizations. It's a relatively simple, but it's a very effective process. But in reality, what I always call them now are NGOs, non-governmental organizations, because the majority of them, either through the foundations or even now directly, USAID. That's a direct CIA deep state concept that was created in 1966, simply to act as an outreach agent for intelligence, American intelligence. And this is extensively documented. But if we go back to why this NGO complex was considered so important and why we have seen it come into effect in Syria to such a powerful extent with organizations like Human Rights Watch, like Amnesty International, we've seen a continuum of reports that will demonize the Syrian state, the Syrian government, the Syrian army, and effectively the Syrian people, because we have to consider that the majority of the Syrian people are supporting the Syrian state institutions and the Syrian army in their battle against what is effectively a proxy war being waged against Syria that was prefabricated. It was planned many, many, many years ago, and again that is extensively documented, and more information is being revealed currently that is demonstrating how long ago this entire project was thought up, and even going back to 1949 through to 1957 through to the 80s.
Yeah.
Syria has been a target for our regimes and for regime change, for interference in its affairs, because it is so geopolitically strategic for them, and also from an oil oil and gas resource perspective, it's also extremely. It's the artery. It's actually the heart that will pump the oil and gas resource arteries into Europe via allies of the United States and the EU. But if we come back very quickly again to the triangle, and if we remember that this money laundering process, so the money is basically being circulated, but it is always basically going back to source, which is to those that have created this entire complex. Why did they create it? Because particularly after the Iraq War, when many of their own soldiers were killed and affected by that war, and actually came out of that war with a great deal of cynicism about the reasons why they were being told to fight this war, they recognized that, well, hang on, we're going to start losing public hearts and minds in this. So what is the best way to deal with this? Is if you imagine two sides of one coin. One is the military-industrial complex, which involves also the army, the military. So clear military intervention, in other words. On the other side, however, you have the NGO complex that still has connections back to the same ruling elite that controlled the military-industrial complex, but it's the nice face, it's the good cop in the good cop, bad cop routine. And basically what the NGO complex is used for is as an infiltration agent, as a fifth column, as an outreach agent to infiltrate these target nations that, again, has been demonstrated. The targeting of Syria was something that was prefabricated many years before it actually started happening. So these NGOs enter these countries purporting to bring humanitarian benefits. In fact, what they are doing is infiltrating the societies, working out exactly where the power bases are, where the possible oppositions are, where the possible schisms are, and how those can be manipulated and engineered and forced into some form of uprising, into some form of co-opted resistance against the government that they consider they don't want. Mm-hmm. It's actually nothing to do with what is in the best interest of the nation that they are targeting. It is for their own predatory objectives, let's say. And very much so, we are looking at predatory humanitarianism because that's what the NGOs represent. They represent the humanitarian pretext for military intervention. And you will see this in Syria, the number of times that all of these humanitarian organizations, when they put out a report that is demonizing the Syrian state, demonizing the Syrian army, claiming all sorts of alleged violations of war, the rules of war, etc., crimes against humanity, it is almost always associated with demanding a no-fly zone. Always. Yeah. And further intervention. Yeah. The removal of Assad, further military intervention, further interference into Syrian affairs. So this completely undermines the whole humanitarian pretext, because if they are asking for a no-fly zone, effectively They are asking for war between the United States and Russia on Syrian soil. There is no escaping that vote, and that has been explained by numerous scholars. Hillary Clinton herself stated that if they achieve a no-fly zone, it will lead to further bloodshed inside Syria. And we've all seen the example of Libya. You can't disassociate the two. You know, it is basically calling for the destruction of Syria, the removal of the government that is standing in the way of our government's geopolitical objectives in the region. That's it.
Yeah.
That's put as simply as possible. And so therefore when hard power, in other words military power, is going to be distasteful to the public, then the soft power, the insidious power is used to both infiltrate but also to change public perception in the West, to support any sort of military escalation, either by proxy, like by the terrorist factions inside Syria, or direct military intervention.
Yeah. But by itself, intervening in a sovereign state is totally morally wrong.
Yes.
The whole discussion is often of what's happening there, but to start with, intervening in another country by itself is morally wrong.
And you know, the clearest quote that I have on that is from Mother Agnes, Mariam Delacroix, who has been working as a humanitarian, a genuine humanitarian inside Syria since the beginning of the conflict and even before, is that she said categorically to me in December last year, just before Aleppo was liberated, between Syrians there is no conflict. Between Syrians there is only solutions. The conflict comes from outside. And this is what we, you know, regardless of our opinion actually of any sovereign nation's government, is irrelevant. Our opinion of the self-determination of any people and where it leads them is irrelevant. Our only interest in this should be ensuring that our governments adhere to their own international law. Because if we allow the creation of a world which is based upon lawlessness, we will also eventually be affected by them. Because if we don't defend that law, that structure, which is correct and which is right and which is morally correct, then we have lost our own moral compass, but we are allowing it to be destroyed for other people as well. And we are allowing our governments to commit criminal acts in our name that will have a lasting effect on the psyche and upon the reaction from those people against us, and understandably so. You know, they are losing their lives, they're losing their families, they're losing their children, they're losing their country, they're losing their civilization. You know, when you look at the destruction in Syria, it's not only Syrians that are losing, we are losing them.
Yeah, and that's especially that aspect that we are not separated from that reality, because we think the war is over there, but the whole NGO complex system, or the humanitarian warfare, is all psychological warfare against us as well. Because the lack of care and the ignorance is the result of this psychological warfare at us. So now we still only psychological affected, but we are affected by these wars. That's so crucial for us to understand that this is affecting us directly, and it will continue to affect us. For instance, the same with the immigrants, the immigrant problem, which is the result of our behavior, or our the destruction of these countries causing effects of what we are doing.
It's weaponization again of the whole refugee crisis, and we're seeing that being used to create schisms again, both in among activists, among left-wing groups who should be against imperialism, who are being forced to basically take sides. You know, if you question the refugee crisis, you're a fascist. But at the same time, if you're allowing it, in other words, because you're a humanitarian, because you have compassion, you are caring for the refugees, but you're caring for them on a one-dimensional level, because you're not thinking, you're treating the symptoms, not the cause. And this is what we need to stop doing as human beings, is just keep on treating the symptoms, because that way we're actually feeding the cause. Because if we don't stop treating, if we don't stop doing that, the cause will keep on escalating And actually the symptoms will then keep on escalating. So while, yes, of course, you know, and the apparatus, the triangle that we've talked about, know perfectly well what triggers our humanitarian buttons, and they're pushing those buttons. Yeah. So we are being manipulated on this level, and what we're actually doing is exacerbating the situation, because if we were to treat the cause, in other words, if we were to demand that our governments pull out of Syria, stop intervening, stop funding, arming and equipping the terrorists, stop the sanctions, that's one of the most important things, lift the sanctions so the Syrian people can breathe, then we would see an almost immediate return of the majority of those refugees. And another very important point to make, again, this is the weaponization of the refugee crisis, for example, is that probably a very small percentage of those refugees are actually Syrian, those that are coming in. And we've had a refugee crisis for decades. Gaddafi spoke about this. You know, he told us that Europe would be flooded with refugees if we continue on this absolutely insane trajectory towards destruction of the Middle East. So a very small percentage, probably around 20%, maximum 30%, are actually Syrian. So that is the level to which we are being manipulated into believing that there is this massive exodus of Syrians. There are over the largest majority of the displaced people inside Syria have stayed in Syria, and they have gone into government-held areas. Over 90% of them. That speaks volumes. If the Syrian government and if the Syrian army were effectively trying to cleanse their country of its own people, why are those people, when they are liberated from our government-funded terrorist organization-held areas, why are they immediately fleeing for protection and refuge into government-held areas, the majority? And why are the majority of the refugees that I have spoken to in Greece, in Lebanon, in various other countries, if I said to them, tomorrow the sanctions will be lifted, the terrorists will be taken out of your country, would you go back? Yes. So that is actually what we should be, you know, if we genuinely want to help these refugees, that is what we should be addressing. We should be ensuring that sanctions are lifted and that our governments start to act lawfully, because we would not ask, you know, we would be horrified if a member of our own family acted in the way that our governments are acting towards entire nations. So why are we not taking a similar stand against our governments?
Exactly. Yeah, well said. Yeah, and to bring it back to Holland, because Holland not only serves with all this, for instance, the International Criminal Court is established in Holland. The so-called justice systems, international justice systems, are based in Holland, so that makes it even more valid for Dutch people to stand up against injustice. Holland gave 4 million euros to the White Helmets in November, and that is interesting to see that this is so psychologically aimed at the people, that we give this money, what the Dutch taxpayers actually give, to terrorist organization actively. And also what I wanted to ask you, because after the liberation of Aleppo, where you were, a few weeks after that came this amnesty report out. That is clearly, which causes a psychological effect.
Yeah.
But people they react on it instead of thinking.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Right? And if you look at the timing of these reports, let's look at the effect of the liberation of Aleppo. Basically, it exposed two major organizations which underpin our government's war effort against Syria. One was the corporate media. It exposed, and many of the NGOs and the UN, but the corporate media in particular, it exposed the fact that for almost 5 years of the occupation of Aleppo, East Aleppo, they had basically been amplifying the voices of the extremist and terrorist factions, while claiming that they were actually amplifying the voices of the Syrian civilians. But in reality, what we saw when, and this has been confirmed by a UN report that of course is not being given any airtime at all by corporate media, a report that came out today or yesterday, is the fact that those Syrian civilians that they were claiming to be protecting, and again demanding no-fly zones, demanding further intervention, on their behalf were actually being imprisoned, incarcerated for almost 5 years under the terrorist regime led by Nusra Front, Al-Qaeda, but many other splinter factions from that, all adhering to the same extremist ideology, all armed, funded, equipped by our governments. And it was their voices that were actually being amplified, because nobody was talking about the suffering, the real suffering of those Syrian people who were being imprisoned, being executed, being raped, being violated, having their children kidnapped, stolen from them. Many of them still don't know where they are. And that was a familiar process that went on in all of the terrorist-occupied areas in Syria. So that was the first thing that was exposed, that our corporate media had basically been lying to us for 5 years about the situation in Aleppo. Then, of course, we had the full exposure of the White Helmets, which is absolutely exemplifies the use of an NGO, a supposed first responder, made absolutely untouchable by 9/11, almost turned immediately into saints. If you associate first responders, it is literally untouchable.
And you get an Oscar.
Yeah, yes. It exposed them through the voices, not my voice, although I've been investigating them since 2015, but through the voices of the Syrian people, who, when you said to them, do you know who the White Helmets were? Did you work with them? Did you know them? Looked at me blankly. It was only when I said, okay, were there any paramedics? Oh yes, there was Al-Qaeda's civil defense. So basically everything we had been saying leading up to the liberation of East Aleppo was proven both by the evidence on the ground, but also through the testimony of the people that had lived under this occupation for 4.5 years. And what we heard was, of course, yes, they only worked with Al-Qaeda, which is what we had been saying, that they were a NATO construct, a primarily British construct. They put in the most of the funding, and they were trained by a British ex-military mercenary, James the Missourier. But they were funded, multi-million funded, over 150 million, by EU governments, by Turkey. They were trained in Turkey, not trained in Syria. And the UK, by the United States, by USA that we just talked about. So very clearly, effectively a CIA outreach operation. That chain of command is very clearly documented. If anybody can look up why USAID was created. And now by Qatar, which is one of the Gulf states that is funding a huge number of the extremist factions inside Syria. So we already knew that there was a question mark over them just based on the funding. Then we see this NGO, which in Western public perception is the only civil defense working in Syria, saving Syrian civilians, embedded in terrorist-held areas, so in Al-Qaeda, ISIS-held areas only. And, somebody actually made the argument to me the other day, because there is a pre-existing Syria civil defense, which was created in 1953, so 60 years before the creation of the White Helmets. And this Syrian state institution has been completely eradicated in public perception in the West by the White Helmets. It was only really through the articles that I wrote after I had gone to Syria and actually met with the real Syria civil defense that people actually started saying, oh my goodness, there was already one?
Yeah.
And somebody actually said to me the other day, trying to argue with my point, they said, yes, but the real Syria civil defense, they don't go into all the areas, they don't go into the terrorist areas. And I thought about it for a second, and I thought, well, hold on, that's maybe because 80% of the population of Syrians inside Syria are living in government-held areas. So yeah, okay, the White Helmets work in areas that hold 20%, the majority of which are actually extremist militant factions. So yeah, that argument doesn't make sense. It falls apart. Because actually the real Syria civil defense are saving civilians who are being attacked on a daily basis by mortar, by Hell cannon, by Grad missiles, and actually by the United States Air Force that has been bombing civilian areas under the pretense of bombing ISIS, but it has been effectively massacring civilians in various areas, including up to 100, I can't remember the exact numbers, but Syrian Arab Army soldiers fighting ISIS in Deir ez-Zor.
So, for humanitarian reasons.
Effectively, yeah, they said that one was a mistake.
Were there any mainstream media journalists on the ground when during the Aleppo liberation? Because there was a lot of reporting from...
Absolutely none.
No.
I mean, this was the extraordinary thing, and I think this just demonstrates so clearly that they knew. That is why they, that there was such a massive ramping up, a ratcheting up of propaganda leading up to the liberation, because the last thing they wanted, actually, were these Syrian civilians that they've been claiming to protect for the last 4.5 years to actually escape and to actually tell the truth. That was not what they wanted. That wasn't part of the plan.
Mm-hmm.
It was fine for them to be used as human shields. It was fine for them to be starved and deprived of medical treatment by the militant factions that they had been funding. But they didn't want them coming out and saying that was what had been happening, because that completely destroyed their entire, propaganda war against Syria. It brought it absolutely crashing down, and I believe that is why now you're seeing human rights reports, UN Security Council report, Amnesty International reports. It's a massive exercise in damage limitation.
Mm-hmm.
And you're suddenly seeing people appear claiming torture after 6 years.
Yeah.
Like, why didn't they appear, 5 years ago, 3 years ago, 2 years ago? Why now?
Mm-hmm.
And that's another thing. People keep saying to me, why won't you admit that the Syrian government has done something, or it's committed atrocities? Because every single atrocity that they've been accused of, that we have investigated, we found to be false, or certainly to not have enough divergent views and divergent evidence to make it a balanced report. And knowing, if we go back to the triangle, if we go back to the fact that Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International have a revolving door back to the State Department, back to deep state and state, so overworld and underworld. Yeah. And Human Rights Watch in particular also have a revolving door to Saudi Arabia, for example, from a funding perspective. Mm-hmm. So if you go back to, it's literally the old adage, follow the money.
Yeah.
And if you follow the money, then you cannot deny the fact that there is going to be some influence from those funding entities.
No.
That's logic. That's rational
Common
thinking.
sense.
Yeah, and and that's very important. What you just said is very important. People need to start employing. They need to break out of this gaslighting,
mm-hmm.
where our reality, our ability to discern reality has actually been taken away from us, and we are having the reality given to us, inflicted upon us. Actually, I don't even, giving is too much. It's too positive. It's negative.
Yeah.
It's being inflicted upon us, and we need to break out of that, what is effectively a victim position, and fight back against what is effectively our abuser.
Yes.
And that involves using common sense, thinking laterally, thinking rationally and logically. It's not about conspiracy theorism. The CIA created that term, by the way, to stop us actually investigating Kennedy's assassination. So, mm-hmm. having that thrown around is mm-hmm. pointless. Because I can't remember who it was who said, whatever conspiracy theory we think up, it's 10 times worse.
Yeah.
But it's even not worth thinking that big. It's just being rational and logical and saying, and trying all the time to find the cause of the symptoms. Because it's only by attacking the cause that we can change the symptoms.
Yes, the why question.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yesterday we saw the liberation of Palmyra, where the news.
We think, yes.
It's sort of that came out.
Yeah.
But there is this dynamic going on in Syria. Where do you see it going, and what can you say to people what they can do about it? Well, you mentioned already that they get more involved.
Yeah.
And that they take action by doing more research and get more involved. Simply said.
Yeah, I think we've seen, and again, I think what is very important is as soon as you see something being amplified, when you see the volume being turned up in corporate media about a particular item, stop, put the brakes on, and think why. who stands to gain? Another very good question to always ask yourself: who stands to gain by whatever narrative is being presented to you? I mean, for example, if you take the claims that President Assad or the Syrian army is bombing its own people with chemical weapons, how do they gain? Why would they gain? Why would the civilians released from terrorist imprisonment in East Aleppo go immediately to government-held West Aleppo? Did they go there to get gas?
Yeah.
I mean, you know, it's an awful thing to say, but that's literally what they're expecting us to believe.
Yeah. It's ridiculous.
And so, you know, come on, please, you know, don't just... They are reacting with a knee-jerk response. The important thing is for us to be more intelligent than they are. And to basically say, okay, who stands to gain in this? Who is generating this report or this narrative? And start to question on that perspective. So that is one very important first step. Start questioning. You don't have to take my truth, you don't have to take your truth, anybody's truth. You should have your own truth. But that truth should be based upon your own understanding of events, not upon what is being fed to you. Again, back to the gaslighting. Break out of victim mode and fight back against your abuser. And the first step of fighting back is to start questioning and stop swallowing what is being fed to you. The second is empathy. We've lost the ability to empathize. Start empathizing with the people inside Syria, the majority of whom stand behind their government, their army. All of their voices have been erased and disappeared for the last 6 years. Completely muted, whereas they're turning the volume up on the terrorists, they're turning it down on those people. Start empathizing with them, because their loss of their children, their loss of their relatives, their loss of their homes, of their livelihood, we're all feeling it. So why are we distancing ourselves from their suffering to such an extent? You know, we need to learn, again, to connect, not through the channels that they want us to connect through, which are going to alter our compassion and distort it and pervert it. But no, as a human being, stand with a human being, connect with a human being. It's so easy now, through Facebook, through social media, through all different channels, it's possible to do. Research those who are in Syria and who are actually supporting their government, supporting their army, supporting their country under international law to defend it itself against a proxy invasion. That's one. And then, you know, as you empower yourself, then the steps come. Then start on a small scale talking to people around you, informing them, getting them to question. Then eventually, you know, yes, start campaigning, start talking to your own politicians, to your own constituents, about sanctions, which, you know, sanctions never have any effect but to weaken a target state. Yeah. They are not doing anything constructive at all. Yes, as in Yemen. They are effectively starving, weakening, in the hope that then those people will turn against the target government. And of course what has confounded them is in Syria, regardless of the misery that they are undergoing, they have refused to do that. So we have to be supporting them in that. Yeah. You know?
And also this aspect of care, this feminine aspect of care, which you are an embodiment of, I think, and then applying the willpower to act upon it despite the fear. That's so crucial that people, I think most people are still governed by their fear, and because of that they don't step out of it, and because often they don't see politicians, or it makes it difficult. But also speaking out in family, with family or friends, that's already a step.
Yeah, you don't have to. You know, everything is baby steps. Yeah. But imagine, and again, this is the empathy aspect. Imagine the fear that you feel to speak out, even among your own family, even among your friends, your peers, your colleagues. Imagine how the Syrian people feel, who are occupied by extremist factions, who cannot even express an opinion because they will lose their life, because they will lose their children, because they will be tortured, because they will be humiliated publicly. Imagine what they are living under, and yet they are still capable of resistance. And we have to take some hope from that in the unassailable right of human beings to remain human. Because there is a greater war, in my opinion, going on, and that's against our humanity.
Yeah.
And that's what we need to be fighting. We need to be maintaining that empathy, that comprehension of the suffering of these people, and trying to put ourselves into their shoes, if you like, and trying to understand it. Because then, to a large extent, then that renders irrelevant our fears of talking to somebody in our family or confronting our friends with an element of truth. And we're standing the storm that's going to come, because it does come.
Yeah.
And it's like we were talking earlier, there's always an element of fear. I'm not going to deny that there are times when I'm like,
no.
But something pushes you on, and what propels you on is that empathy with humanity, and that's what we have to hold on to. That's what we have to allow to make us powerful, and to raise the volume of our own voices. Because without those voices, we're lost.
Yeah.
And the Syrian people, are abandoned to their fate, basically.
Yeah, it's beautiful said, Vanessa. And it requires also a sort of spiritual growing up of having the empathy to act for the suffering of other beings, because we are connected, whether you can see them or not, whether it's family or friends. That's really like a growing up and accepting this fact that there is a bigger agenda around it. So
well, it's a taking of it's a taking of responsibility.
Yeah.
It's not abrogating that responsibility to our government or to the NGO. Again, that's another reason why these NGOs have been created, because they take away our responsibility. They create apathy in society. They create really a lazy society, a society that doesn't want to question because someone else is doing it for them. And look, that's an NGO. They're not government funded, so they must be good. Yeah. And so we can do good things without having to make too much effort. And of course everyone would love that, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I would. So it's normal, it's natural for people for that to appeal to them. But actually, no, we need to break out of this paradigm. We need to actually start taking back the responsibility for what is happening in this world, not dismissing it because it's in Syria or because it's in Yemen or because it's in Libya and it's far away and it's not going to touch us. It is touching us because there is a connectedness on a human level, but also there's a connectedness even on a sort of non-spiritual level, on a physical level, in the sense that at the moment that terrorist entity, in all its different guises, is contained within Syria. But if that is released out of Syria, where is it going to come?
Yeah.
So it's not that far away from us, and actually Syria is fighting the battle for us.
Exactly.
And as such, they should have our support.
Yeah. Good. Thank you very much, Vanessa. This video will inspire more people to act, because that's what we need, and to care. So we will be following you and keep an eye and be inspired and act. So thank you very much for this talk.
Thank you.
They told us to pack up our bags and head south. They said that the luck of the Irish ran out. They told us they burned down our farms and our stores. They cursed us for cowards and our wives for whores. Our brother John was out plowing the field. A group of army Yankees rode up on his heels. They never gave him a chance to throw steel. Fired at him till his young body lay still. The cries of our mother rang out through the land as the blood.
This is JJ from Against the Wall, and you're listening to UCY